Tonight, the untold story, how investigators brought Scott Peterson to justice.
First, officers had a gut feeling.
Did you murder your wife?
The clues.
Amber, did you know that Scott was a married man?
We did have a romantic relationship.
She never made it to Christmas dinner. 8 months pregnant, her bags already packed for the hospital, her nursery painted and waiting. Laci Peterson vanished on Christmas Eve without a trace. No note, no struggle, no witness. Just a golden retriever wandering the streets alone, his leash still dragging behind him, and a front door left unlocked in the middle of the morning. And the man who was supposed to find her, the man who stood before cameras with trembling lips and watery eyes, begging the world to help bring his wife home, already knew exactly where she was. Beneath the cold, black water of San Francisco Bay, weighted down, forgotten, discarded like she was nothing. What you are about to watch is not a story about a missing woman. It is a story about a calculated, cold-blooded killer who smiled through press conferences, whispered sweet nothings to his mistress on the same night he attended a candlelight vigil for his missing wife, and looked investigators dead in the eye without flinching. For months. This is a story about the kind of evil that wears a nice shirt, shakes your hand, and tells you everything is going to be fine. Before we go any further, this case contains deeply disturbing details involving the murder of a pregnant woman and her unborn child. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. This content is intended for mature audiences only. If you are new here, welcome to Revealing Untold Crimes, the channel that goes beyond the headlines and into the darkest corners of true crime. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a case, and drop a comment below, letting us know where in the world you are watching from. We have viewers from every corner of the globe, and we love knowing who is here with us. Now, let us go back to Christmas Eve, 2002, and uncover the truth about what really happened to Laci Peterson. Christmas Eve, 2002. Modesto, California. A golden retriever named Mackenzie is wandering the street alone. His leash is still attached, dragging along the pavement behind him as he moves through the neighborhood without direction. No one called him out. No one is with him. He simply appeared, the way dogs do when something has gone wrong inside the house they belong to. The back door of the house on Covina Avenue is unlocked. The lights are on. Inside, everything looks exactly the way it should, except for the person who is supposed to be there. Laci Peterson, 27 years old and 8 months pregnant, has not been seen since that morning. Her mother, Sharon Rocha, has a Christmas dinner waiting. The family is expected before dark. Laci has never once failed to show up without calling first. She will not be calling. Before we go any further, this case involves the death of a pregnant woman and her unborn child. The details ahead are intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Laci Peterson was born Laci Rocha, raised right there in Modesto, California. The people who knew her describe her the same way every single time. Warm, dependable, present. The kind of woman who showed up early, remembered the things that mattered, and never left anyone wondering where she was. She met Scott Peterson while both were students at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo in the late 1990s. By the time they married on August 5, 2000, her family had welcomed him completely. He was polished, attentive, and by every outward measure, exactly what he appeared to be. By 2002, they were settled into the house on Covina Avenue. Laci was 8 months along with their first child, a boy they had already chosen a name for. They were going to call him Connor. The nursery on Covina Avenue was already painted and prepared. Christmas was 2 days away, and Laci had the holiday mapped out the way she always did. Family plans, food, every detail accounted for. The day before she vanishes is December 23rd. It is, by every available account, a completely ordinary day. Someone in the Peterson home uses the family computer to search for a fleece scarf and a sunflower motif umbrella stand. A creme brulee recipe is printed and left on the counter. Laci had a sunflower tattooed on her ankle, a detail her family and friends knew well. The computer searches are consistent with who she was and what she was doing that day. They are also the last digital trace of a normal life still in motion. That evening, Sharon Rocha calls her daughter. It is a routine call between a mother and daughter the night before Christmas Eve. Laci sounds completely fine. There is nothing in the conversation that sounds like a woman who has run out of time. Sharon hangs up without any concern whatsoever. The next morning, December 24th, Laci Peterson is gone. The man who reports her missing that Christmas Eve afternoon is her husband, Scott Peterson. He is the one who calls Sharon at 5:17 in the afternoon to say Laci has not come home. He is the first person police sit down with that night, and he is the same man that investigators, within hours of that first conversation, will begin quietly and methodically building a murder case against. Laci Peterson was never seen alive again after that morning. What happened to her, how it was uncovered, and the investigation that followed is one of the most meticulously documented criminal cases in American history. That is where this story begins. And as you are about to see, it does not end cleanly. Welcome to Revealing Untold Crimes, where every case is covered with the depth you just experienced in the first 60 seconds. If you are new here, hit subscribe and the bell so you never miss an upload. Drop a comment letting us know where in the world you are watching from. Now let us get into who Scott Peterson really was. Scott Peterson was 30 years old in 2002. He sold fertilizer for a living. Specifically, he worked as a sales representative for Tradcorp, a Spanish agricultural company that distributed fertilizer products across the United States. His office was a warehouse in an industrial section of Modesto. On the surface, it was an ordinary job in an ordinary part of town, but the role gave Scott something that would become important later. It gave him a reason to travel. In February of 2002, Scott traveled to Cairo. In June, he went to Belgium. In October, he was in southern Spain. These trips were real. They were documented. They were part of his actual professional life. Scott Peterson was not a man who fabricated his entire identity from nothing. He took what was real and reshaped it into whatever version of himself served the moment. Those international destinations, Cairo, Belgium, southern Spain, the kind that make a man sound worldly and unattached when dropped into casual conversation, would show up again later, handed to someone who had no way of knowing they had already been lived. Before any of that, there is something about Scott Peterson that his own family eventually acknowledged. He had a documented history of infidelity. This was not a secret that surfaced only after Laci disappeared. His half-sister, Ann Bird, would later describe him publicly as someone who was weak when it came to women. Those are her words, not a characterization from outside the family. The admission is significant precisely because it comes from someone who loved him and knew him up close. His family acknowledged that what emerged during the investigation was not the first time Scott had been unfaithful. It was a pattern that had simply never met a consequence serious enough to stop it. That pattern was still running in the weeks before Christmas 2002, and it had a name. Her name was Amber Frey. On November 20th, 2002, 5 weeks before Laci Peterson would disappear, Scott was introduced to Amber Frey through a mutual friend in Fresno, California. Amber was 27 years old, a massage therapist and a single mother. When the mutual friend made the introduction, she told Amber that Scott was not married. Scott looked at Amber and confirmed it. He was single, he said, available. Within weeks, they were talking about a future together. What Scott built with Amber Frey was not a lie constructed entirely from invented material. That is the part worth slowing down on. He did not create a fictional character and play the role. He took his actual life, the international travel to Cairo and Belgium and southern Spain, the professional career, the lifestyle, the confidence that came from a man who had lived those things, and he edited it. He removed the wife. He removed the pregnancy now in its final months. He removed the house on Covina Avenue, with the nursery already painted and the family calendar already full. What remained after that editing was a version of Scott Peterson that appeared available, accomplished, and free of obligation. It was a presentation built from real materials, and because the foundation was real, it was convincing. Then came December 9th, 2002. On that day, Scott called Amber Frey, and he was in tears. He told her he had lost his wife. He said that the upcoming holidays would be his first without her. He spoke about her in the past tense, as someone already gone from his life, someone he was processing the loss of. Amber listened and believed him. She had been given no reason not to. She thought she was hearing a man who had been widowed and was still finding his way through it. Laci Peterson was alive on December 9th, 2002. She would not be reported missing for another 15 days. That phone call is the first documented moment in this case where Scott Peterson speaks about Laci as though she no longer exists. It is not ambiguous. It is not a figure of speech that can be explained away. He told his girlfriend, in tears, that he had lost his wife, using those specific words in that specific emotional register, while Laci was at home on Covina Avenue, 8 months pregnant, going about her day, planning Christmas, calling her mother in the evenings the way she always did. On the very same day he made that call to Amber Frey, Scott Peterson went out and purchased a 14-foot aluminum fishing boat. He paid for it and brought it to his warehouse and told no one. Not Laci, not his mother or his father, not his in-laws, not a single person connected to his life knew the boat existed. His own father would later testify at trial that he had no knowledge of any boat. Scott had not held a fishing license since 1994, 8 years before this purchase. He would obtain one shortly before Christmas, and it would be valid for exactly 2 days. The boat was kept in the warehouse connected to his Trade Corp office in Modesto, and inside that same warehouse, using a 90-pound bag of cement, a purchase confirmed later by a receipt recovered by investigators, Scott began making homemade concrete anchors. The process of casting them in that space left circular marks pressed into the cement dust on the warehouse floor. Those marks were still visible when investigators arrived. They suggest that as many as 5 separate anchors were made in that space over the course of those weeks. When investigators eventually go through that warehouse in detail, they will find only one anchor. The others are never recovered. Around the same time he purchased the boat, Scott began using the home computer he shared with Laci to research the tides and currents of San Francisco Bay. He searched water movement. He looked into current patterns and tidal behavior specific to that body of water. This research was conducted weeks before Laci disappeared. Investigators recovered it later from the computer's search history during a forensic review of the household's digital records. It sits there in the data, time-stamped, predating everything that came after it. There is one more detail from this period that investigators noted and would return to later. Before Christmas Eve, Scott asked Laci to have the patio umbrellas moved into storage. It sounds like a routine domestic request, the kind exchanged without thought between two people managing a household together before the holidays. But investigators flagged it for a specific reason. Those umbrellas gave Scott a ready, visible, entirely innocent-looking explanation for why he might be seen loading something large and covered in a tarp into the back of his truck on the morning of December 24th. Anyone watching from a neighboring house or passing on the street would have had no reason to look twice. He was moving the umbrellas. That is all it would have looked like. That is the picture of the 3 weeks leading up to Christmas Eve, 2002. A man who told his girlfriend his wife was already gone. A boat purchased in secret on the same day he said it. Homemade concrete anchors cast in a private warehouse. Tide schedules for San Francisco Bay pulled up on a shared home computer and left in the search history. And a domestic reason arranged in advance for why a large covered object might be loaded into the back of his truck without drawing attention. None of this begins on December 24th. It begins on December 9th. The day Scott Peterson called Amber Frey in tears about a wife he had not yet lost, and then went out the same afternoon and bought the boat he told no one about. The preparation came first. Christmas Eve came second. December 24th, 2002, begins like any other morning on Covina Avenue. The street is quiet. The neighborhood is settling into the rhythms of Christmas Eve, families preparing, plans being finalized, the day moving at the relaxed pace that holidays tend to produce. Inside the Peterson home, by Scott's own account, everything is calm. Before he leaves that morning, Scott speaks to a neighbor. He tells the neighbor he is planning to go golfing that day. It is a casual exchange, the kind you have at the end of a driveway or across a fence on a holiday morning. Nothing remarkable about it. The neighbor takes it at face value and moves on with their day. Scott does not go golfing. When investigators question him that evening, Scott tells them he changed his mind at the last minute. He decided it was too cold for golf, so he went fishing instead. That is the version he gives police. Golfing to the neighbor that morning. Fishing to the investigators that night. 2 different stories, offered to 2 different people, before he has even properly accounted for his day. Neither account is extracted under pressure. Both are volunteered, and they do not match. According to Scott, he last saw Laci at approximately 9:30 in the morning. She was at home, watching television. He says she had plans for the rest of the day. She was going to finish tidying the house, do some baking, and take Mackenzie out for a walk later. He says everything seemed normal when he left. He says she was fine. At 10:08 in the morning, Scott uses his cell phone to check his voicemail. The call is brief, but the cell tower that registers the signal is located near the Peterson home on Covina Avenue. That ping places Scott still in the Modesto area at 10:08 in the morning, later than the departure time he describes to police. Investigators pull this from phone records during the course of the investigation. At trial, investigator Stephen Jacobson from the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office testifies to this specific detail. It becomes a documented timeline discrepancy, placed directly in front of the jury. Scott told police he had already left for the Berkeley Marina by that point in the morning. The cell tower says otherwise. 10 minutes after that ping, at 10:18 in the morning, a woman named Karen Service is outside her home in the neighborhood when she notices something. Mackenzie, the Peterson family's golden retriever, is wandering in the street alone. His leash is still attached, trailing behind him on the pavement as he moves without direction. Karen Service recognizes the dog. She goes to him, collects the leash, and walks him back to the Peterson property. She returns him to the backyard and closes the gate behind her. She knocks on the door. No one answers. The house is quiet. She leaves. Karen Service is later able to establish the timing of her discovery through her own bank records. An ATM transaction she made that morning provides a cross-reference point that anchors the 10:18 timeline. That transaction record becomes part of the documented evidence. The time is not an estimate. It is verified. That moment, 10:18 on the morning of December 24th, is the last documented activity connected to the Peterson home before Scott returns that afternoon. Karen Service does not see Laci. She does not hear anyone inside. There is no movement at the door, no voice from inside the house, no indication that anyone is home. She closes the gate and walks away, and the house on Covina Avenue goes quiet. Scott, by his account, drives approximately 90 miles from Modesto to the Berkeley Marina in the East Bay. He says he launches the 14-foot aluminum boat and spends several hours fishing alone on San Francisco Bay. When investigators ask him later what he was fishing for, he cannot tell them. He cannot name the species. He cannot identify the bait he used. He offers none of the specific, practical detail that comes naturally to anyone who has spent a day on the water with an actual purpose in mind. There is also no documented record of Scott having taken that boat out on the water at any point before Christmas Eve. He purchased it 15 days earlier. As far as investigators can establish, December 24th is its first time on the water. The contents of Scott's truck that day tell a story of their own. When investigators document what he was carrying, they find brand new fishing gear that has never been removed from its original packaging. They find patio umbrellas. They find large plastic tarps. They find a toolbox. Not one of those items is what you expect to find in the vehicle of a man who drove 90 miles on Christmas Eve morning simply to fish alone on a bay. Brand new gear still in the package is not the kit of someone with a fishing habit. Umbrellas and tarps are not fishing supplies. Taken together, those contents do not add up to the story Scott is telling. Scott arrives back at the house on Covina Avenue at approximately 4:30 in the afternoon. He finds Mackenzie in the backyard. The leash is still on the dog, exactly as Karen Service left it when she returned him hours earlier. Scott enters the house through the French doors at the rear of the property. They are unlocked. He goes inside. He eats pizza. He drinks some milk. Then he does the laundry. Specifically, he places his own clothes, the clothes he wore that day, into the washing machine and runs a cycle. He does not touch the full basket of dirty laundry sitting in the bedroom, waiting to be washed. He does not touch the pile of soiled rags sitting directly on top of the washing machine, right there in front of him, impossible to miss. He washes only what he himself had on that day, and nothing else. When Detective Burkini later examines this detail and testifies about it at trial, he describes exactly what he saw. The full basket, the rags on the machine, and only Scott's clothes from that day moving through the wash cycle. The question Brocchini and every investigator after him cannot answer is a simple one. Why, in the first hour after arriving home to find your pregnant wife missing, would you put your own clothes in the washing machine while leaving everything else completely untouched? At 5:17 in the afternoon, Scott calls Sharon Rocha. It has been nearly 1 full hour since he walked through those rear French doors. He tells her that Laci is missing. The family is due at Sharon's home for Christmas dinner within the hour. Laci has not called. She has not shown up. Sharon Rocha hears what her son-in-law is telling her, and she knows immediately that something is wrong. Not the ordinary concern of a changed plan or a delayed arrival. Something more specific than that. Something that does not have a name yet, but is already fully formed in the pit of her stomach. At 5:47 in the afternoon, Laci's stepfather Ron Gransky contacts the Modesto Police Department and files a missing person report. It is 20 minutes after Scott's call to Sharon. Ron Gransky does not wait. He picks up the phone and makes the call. When the first officers arrive at the Peterson home that evening, they begin asking Scott to account for his day. He answers their questions. But before any officer requests documentation, before anyone asks him to prove where he was, Scott Peterson reaches into his pocket and produces his parking receipt from the Berkeley Marina. He volunteers it. He hands it over without being asked. The officers note this. A man whose wife has just been reported missing does not typically walk into the first conversation with law enforcement already holding his alibi in his hand. He tells the officers he went fishing that day. Later that same evening, in a separate conversation, he tells his father-in-law that he had been golfing. Earlier that morning, he told the neighbor he was going golfing. The progression runs like this: golfing to the neighbor before he left, fishing to the police when he returned, golfing again to the father-in-law later that night. Investigators note the contradiction immediately. It is not a minor inconsistency that stress or grief might reasonably produce. It is 2 entirely different accounts of the same day offered to different people across the same evening, with no explanation for the discrepancy. Inside the house, the officers begin moving through the rooms. What they find is not the scene of a struggle. There is no overturned furniture, no broken objects, no visible sign of a physical confrontation. The house is tidy, quiet, but what is present is just as telling as what is not. Laci's jewelry is on the nightstand. Her purse is inside the house. When family members are asked about this, they are consistent and immediate in their response. Laci never left the house without her jewelry, and she never went anywhere without her purse. Both are here. Both are exactly where they would be if she had never left voluntarily. On the bed, officers observe what appears to be the impression of a body having been laid across the surface of the comforter. The shape is visible. Investigators photograph it, along with everything else. They photograph the jewelry on the nightstand. They photograph the purse. They photograph the laundry basket in the bedroom and the rags on top of the washing machine. They photograph the contents of Scott's truck. Every detail goes into the record. The house does not announce what happened inside it, but it offers enough in those first hours for the officers who walk through it on Christmas Eve night to understand that what they are looking at is not a woman who left on her own. The call comes into Detective Al Brocchini's home on Christmas Eve night. He is not at the station. He is not on duty. He picks up the phone, and within minutes, he has a picture of what is being described. A pregnant woman, 8 months along, missing on Christmas Eve. A husband with a story that the first officers on scene cannot quite square with the way the evening is unfolding around them. Brocchini listens to what he is told, and he makes a decision. He gets dressed and drives to Covina Avenue. Before Brocchini arrives, the decision to mobilize immediately has already been made at the command level. Modesto Police Chief Roy Wasden does not wait. The standard protocol in a missing adult case is to hold off 24 to 48 hours before launching a full response. Chief Wasden sets that protocol aside on Christmas Eve night. The reasoning is straightforward. The victim profile alone is enough to justify it. A woman who is 8 months pregnant, who has a family dinner to attend that evening, who has never once failed to call ahead when plans changed, has simply vanished without a word. There is no note, no call, no explanation, no reason consistent with her character for her to be anywhere other than where she said she would be. Chief Wasden looks at that picture, and he mobilizes. Detective Brocchini arrives at the Peterson residence at 9:25 in the evening. He introduces himself to Scott Peterson, tells him he is there to help, and asks if Scott would be willing to walk him through the house and the property. Scott agrees. The two of them move through the home together, and Brocchini begins making mental notes of everything he sees. The comforter on the bed carries what appears to be the impression of a body having been laid across its surface. Laci's jewelry is on the nightstand. Her purse is inside the house. Family members, when contacted, are consistent and immediate on both points. Laci never left the house without her jewelry, and she never went anywhere without her purse. Both are present. Neither has been touched. The laundry basket in the bedroom is full and has not been moved. The pile of soiled rags sitting directly on top of the washing machine has not been disturbed either. And yet the washing machine has been used since Scott came home. The only clothes that have gone through it are the clothes Scott wore that day, and nothing else. Brocchini looks at the full basket and the rags on the machine and the single load Scott chose to run, and he files it without saying a word. At some point during the walkthrough, Brocchini accidentally bumps the door of Scott's truck into Laci's car while they are moving through the driveway area. It is a minor thing, the kind of accidental contact that happens in a tight space. Scott's reaction is immediate. He reaches into his hand where he is wearing a glove, pulls it off, and steps forward to offer it as a buffer between the two vehicles so the car does not get scratched. Brocchini watches the reaction and registers exactly what it means. His pregnant wife has been missing for hours. Search teams are being organized outside. Officers are moving through the property. And in that specific moment, what Scott Peterson moves toward is the car. Brocchini later states it plainly in his testimony. His major concern in that moment was not Laci. At 11:17 that evening, Brocchini accompanies Scott to the warehouse in the industrial section of Modesto that Scott uses as his Trade Corp office. They go inside, and there in that warehouse is a 14-foot aluminum fishing boat that no one in Scott's life outside of that room knew existed. Beside it sits a homemade concrete anchor. On the floor of the warehouse, pressed into the cement dust, are circular marks, the kind left when a container is placed repeatedly in the same spot to cast something heavy. The marks suggest more than one anchor was made in that space. Brocchini takes it all in. He does not react. He does not ask questions that would reveal what he is thinking. He files it and moves on. Shortly after midnight, Scott is brought to Modesto Police Department headquarters for a formal recorded interview. Brocchini steps out briefly to set up the recording equipment in the adjacent room. Through the observation window, he can see Scott Peterson sitting at the table waiting. Scott is leaning back in his chair. His hands are in his pockets. He is not pacing. He is not pressing his hands to his face. He is not staring at the floor with the weight of a man who does not know where his pregnant wife is. He is relaxed. Brocchini has spent years in rooms like this with people in serious situations. He knows what people look like when they are carrying something they cannot put down. Scott Peterson does not look like that. He later describes it in his testimony precisely as he experienced it. The body language of a man whose pregnant wife has just disappeared should not look like that. Every word of the interview that follows goes into the recorded file. The following morning is Christmas Day. Hundreds of volunteers have filled the streets of Modesto. Search teams are organized and moving. Helicopters are in the air. The public does not yet know what investigators already suspect. At some point during that morning, while the search is active all around them, Scott pulls Brocchini aside. He has a question. He wants to know whether grief counselors will be made available to Laci's family. It has been less than 24 hours since she was reported missing. She has not been found. She has not been declared dead. The search is still very much underway. Brocchini's response is measured. He tells Scott that if they find Laci, nobody is going to need counseling. Scott's reply does not shift in response to that. He says they will need someone regardless. He says it with the settled quality of a man who has already arrived at a conclusion and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. Brocchini notes it and moves on. Scott's half-sister, Ann Bird, is troubled by the fishing alibi from the beginning, and she will say so publicly later. Her reasoning comes from a specific and practical place. She knows how Laci ran the household. She knows what a holiday like Christmas Eve looked like in that family. On a day like that, With everything that needed to be done before a family gathering, Laci would have had Scott working through a list of tasks from the moment he woke up. Ann Bird describes it as a honey-do list a mile long. A solo fishing trip 90 miles away on Christmas Eve morning does not fit anything she knows about how that day should have looked in that household. She says this publicly, without qualification, and the investigators hear it the same way she intends it. On December 26th, 2 days after Laci was reported missing, investigators make the drive out to the Berkeley Marina to verify one specific element of Scott's account. He told police that it had been raining on San Francisco Bay on Christmas Eve. That is a checkable claim. When investigators check it, no one else in the area that day reports any rain. Not at the marina, not on the water, not in the surrounding region. The weather record does not support what Scott told police. It is a verifiable falsehood placed inside his account of Christmas Eve, and it is now part of the documented file. Also on December 2006, Scott backs out of a polygraph test he had previously agreed to take. He gives no reason that satisfies investigators. He simply withdraws. He will not take a polygraph at any point during the investigation, not once. The offer is made more than once. The answer is always the same. On December 27th, Detective Henry Dodge Hendy executes a second search warrant at Scott's warehouse. What Hendy finds confirms and extends what Brocchini observed 2 nights earlier. There is cement powder on the boat trailer, physical residue consistent with the casting of concrete in that space. The circular marks on the warehouse floor are confirmed and documented. And then, on the boat itself, Hendy finds something that no one had located during the first visit. A pair of needle-nosed pliers. Clamped between the teeth of those pliers is a single dark hair. Hendy documents it precisely, and the hair is immediately packaged and sent to the FBI laboratory for forensic analysis. It is the first potential physical piece of evidence that could connect Scott's boat directly to Laci Peterson's body. Nobody knows yet what the results will show, but investigators know what they are holding, and they treat it accordingly. During this same period, another detail comes to the surface. Scott has sold Laci's Land Rover. He purchased a new pickup truck to replace it, and did not tell anyone in Laci's family. The transaction is quiet. The purchase is quiet. No one connected to Laci is informed. It joins the list of things Scott does during the investigation without telling the people who are supposed to be sharing this ordeal with him. Throughout January and February and into early March, Scott makes repeated trips to the Berkeley Marina. Investigators conducting surveillance on him document at least 5 separate solo visits during this period. Each time, Scott drives to the marina, parks near the water, and sits. He does not approach the dive teams working the bay. He does not speak to search crews. He does not insert himself into the organized efforts to find his wife. He sits in his vehicle, near the water, and watches. Investigators monitoring his movements reach a consistent conclusion about what those visits represent. They believe Scott is tracking the search. They believe he is watching to see how close the teams are getting to wherever in that bay he left Laci Peterson. In early March 2003, the FBI returns its forensic findings on the hair recovered from the needle-nosed pliers. The analysis uses mitochondrial DNA, a form of genetic testing that examines material passed through the maternal line. Mitochondrial DNA is not as individually definitive as nuclear DNA. It cannot identify a single person to the exclusion of all others the way a complete DNA profile can. But the result is unambiguous in what it does establish. The hair recovered from the pliers on Scott's boat is consistent with hairs taken from Laci Peterson's own hairbrush. It is the first physical forensic link between that boat and Laci's body. It is not the totality of the case, but it is the piece that moves the physical evidence forward in a way nothing else has managed to do. On March 5, 2003, the Modesto Police Department officially reclassifies the investigation. It is no longer a missing person case. It is a homicide. The detectives and the prosecutors from the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office have already been in discussions about what a no-body homicide arrest warrant would require and whether the case as constructed could support one. They have looked at the evidence, the behavior, the forensics, and the documented pattern of lies, and they have concluded that they are prepared to move forward without the bodies if that is what the investigation demands. As it turns out, they will not need to make that call. But on March 5th, 2003, they do not know that yet. What they know is that Laci Peterson is dead, that the evidence assembled over the past 10 weeks points in one direction without exception, and that the man at the center of it is still making solo trips to the Berkeley Marina, still parking near the water, still sitting there watching the search teams work the bay below him. December 30th, 2002. 6 days after Laci Peterson was reported missing, the tip line at the Modesto Police Department receives a call. The woman on the other end identifies herself and explains that she has been in a romantic relationship with Scott Peterson. Her name is Amber Frey. She has not been contacted by investigators. She has not been subpoenaed. No one has knocked on her door or left a message asking her to come forward. She picks up the phone and calls on her own while she is still shaking, because she has just seen something in the news coverage of Laci Peterson's disappearance that she cannot ignore. A friend had shown her an article about the case. The article described Scott's truck and his occupation as a fertilizer salesman. She reads those two details, and she knows immediately. She later describes the moment she made the connection in her trial testimony and in her own book, Witness, published in 2005. She says she was in shock. She says she was crying and had no idea how long she had been crying. She says she looked at what she was reading and thought, "It is him." She calls the tip line while still trembling and tells them everything she knows. The same day, Detective Al Brocchini and Detective John Bueller drive to Fresno to meet Amber Frey in person. What they find when they sit down with her is a woman who is shaken but completely coherent, completely cooperative, and completely clear about what she is willing to do. She is not reluctant. She does not need to be persuaded or reassured or walked carefully toward a decision. When investigators ask whether she would be willing to record her future phone conversations with Scott, she agrees without hesitation. The Modesto Police Department will later state publicly that Amber Frey contacted them entirely on her own initiative and cooperated fully from the first moment of contact. She signs nothing under duress. She is not promised anything in return. She simply wants to help, and she says so without qualification. That same afternoon, investigators take Amber to an electronics store to purchase a cassette tape recording device that can be connected to her phone. The equipment is being selected. The operation is being assembled in real time. The cassette recorder is the specific device documented in the trial record as the tool used to capture what follows. And then, while they are still inside that store, while the purchase is being completed and the setup has not yet been finished, Amber's phone rings. The caller ID reads Scott Peterson. Amber reaches for the earpiece to get it in place before answering. She drops it. Her hands are shaking badly enough that she cannot get it seated in time. She is, in her own documented words, completely frazzled, rattled in a way that makes the simplest physical task feel impossible. Scott does not reach her live. He leaves a voicemail and the call ends without a conversation. But that moment in the electronics store captures something essential about what this operation is going to demand of Amber Frey. It is going to be close. It is going to be live and immediate and unpredictable. And it is going to require her to hold herself together under conditions that most people never face. She holds herself together. Over the weeks and months that follow, investigators record more than 29 hours and 15 minutes of phone conversations between Scott Peterson and Amber Frey. Detective Brocchini will later testify to this specific figure at trial. 29 hours and 15 minutes. Scott calls constantly, and he calls freely. He has no knowledge that the line is being monitored. He has no awareness that every word he says is being captured, time-stamped, and delivered directly to the investigators who are building a case around him. He speaks to Amber the way a man speaks when he is certain no one else is listening. On the same day the operation begins, December 30th, Scott calls Amber and tells her she is special. He tells her she is unique and wonderful. He tells her he has a photograph of her, and that when he looks at it, he can feel her in his arms. He says he can feel her lips. Laci Peterson has been missing for 6 days at this point. The search for her is active. His name is already drawing scrutiny from the investigators he interacted with on Christmas Eve night, and he is on the phone telling his girlfriend he can feel her in his arms and asking her to understand how much he means every word of it. Amber records the call and gives it to investigators. On New Year's Eve, Scott attends a candlelight vigil held in Modesto for his missing wife. He stands in that crowd. He is photographed there alongside Laci's grieving family and friends. The following morning, that photograph runs on the front page of the newspaper. It circulates across the country as an image of a husband participating in the public mourning for his missing wife. What investigators know, because they are listening to the wiretap, is what Scott is saying on the phone while standing in that crowd. He calls Amber from the vigil and tells her he is in Paris. He tells her he is standing near the Eiffel Tower, watching the New Year's Eve celebration unfold around him. He describes the size of the crowd. He tells her the celebration is unreal. He is delivering a detailed account of a city he is not in to a woman whose phone is being recorded, while his photograph is being taken at a candlelight vigil for his missing pregnant wife in Modesto, California. The next morning, that photograph is on the front page. Investigators listening to the wiretap hold both of those facts at the same time. On January 6, 2003, the tone of the recorded calls shifts. The National Enquirer is preparing to publish a story about the affair, and Scott is aware it is coming. He calls Amber. For the first time in all the conversations recorded up to this point, he tells her something true. He tells her he has been lying. He tells her he is married. He tells her that the woman he is married to is named Laci, and that Laci disappeared just before Christmas, and that for the past 2 weeks he has been in Modesto with both families searching for her. He tells Amber he cannot say more right now, because he needs to protect her from the media attention that is about to arrive. He frames his honesty as protection. He frames the admission as concern for her. Amber listens, and then she asks him about December 9th. She brings up the phone call where Scott told her, in tears, that he had lost his wife. She asks him directly what that was about. Scott deflects at first. He tries to move past the question without engaging it fully. But Amber does not move on. She holds the question and keeps it in the conversation. And then, on tape, with the recorder running and Brocchini and his colleagues, on the other side of that line, Scott Peterson confirms it. He says the words out loud. He says he told her he had lost his wife. He says yes, he did say that. That confirmation, delivered in Scott's own voice, on a recorded line, in direct response to a direct question, becomes one of the most significant pieces of evidence the entire investigation produces. He told his girlfriend on December 9th that he had lost his wife. Laci Peterson was alive on December 9th. And now, on January 6th, Scott has confirmed on tape that he said it. There is no ambiguity in the recording. There is no way to characterize it as a misunderstanding. He said it, and he confirmed he said it, and both moments are captured. The calls continue across January and February, and the lies accumulate with a consistency that investigators find almost remarkable in its steadiness. At various points across the 29 hours of recorded conversations, Scott tells Amber that he has taken a police polygraph test and passed it. He tells her that Laci not only knew about their relationship with Amber, but had come to accept it. He places himself in cities he is not in. He constructs versions of his days that bear no relationship to where he actually is or what he is actually doing. Each of these claims is recorded at the moment it is made. Each is time-stamped. Each is false. And each one sits in the documented record of the investigation alongside every other claim he makes across those 29 hours. In February, Scott calls Amber and asks her to come and meet him at Lake Arrowhead. He is emotional about it in a way that comes through clearly on the recording. He is persistent. He returns to the request more than once in the conversation. Investigators working with Amber are unambiguous in their instruction to her. She is not to go under any circumstances. She does not go. Scott continues to call. February 10th, 2003 is the date Laci Peterson's son was due to be born. It is the date the family had been anticipating for months before Christmas Eve. That evening, friends and family gather in Modesto to mark what that day means in the absence of Laci and Connor. Scott does not attend. He is not present for the people who loved Laci and who are sitting with what February 10th now represents. Instead, he calls Amber. He gives her specific instructions over the phone. He tells her to go to a particular location in her neighborhood, to find a specific lamppost near a specific bush. He tells her there is something waiting for her there. She finds the package. Inside it is a music CD. The Norah Jones album, Come Away With Me, a romantic gesture left in secret, tucked beneath a bush near a lamppost, delivered to his girlfriend on the same night that the people who loved Laci Peterson were gathered together grieving what should have been the birth of her child. Investigators are watching. What the 29 hours of recorded calls document is not simply infidelity. Infidelity is a moral failure, and it is the easiest characterization of what those tapes contain. But what they actually document, listened to in full, is something more specific and more consequential than that. They document a man who is, across dozens of separate phone conversations over a period of more than 2 months, actively constructing a false version of his own reality in real time, while a homicide investigation bearing his name is intensifying around him, while dive teams are working San Francisco Bay, while the families of his missing wife are gathered in Modesto holding vigils and going on television and waiting for news that never comes. He is doing all of that, and he is still calling Amber Frey, still telling her she is special, still leaving packages near lampposts, still placing himself in Paris. The recordings are not a side element of this investigation. They are a window into exactly how Scott Peterson functions when the pressure around him is at its most extreme. And what that window shows, across 29 hours and 15 minutes of captured conversation, is a man who does not crack, who does not slip, who does not reach for honesty when the situation would seem to demand it. He simply continues to build the version of the story he wants the person on the other end of the line to believe, the same way he has done from the very first conversation he ever had with Amber Frey. The difference now is that someone is recording every single word. You are watching Revealing Untold Crimes, the channel that does not stop at the headline. What you just heard from those recorded calls is only part of what investigators built against Scott Peterson. The trial will reveal exactly how they used all of it. If you have not subscribed yet, do it now. Every case on this channel goes this deep. Now let us follow the story as it goes public. January 13th, 2003. 3 weeks into the investigation, police receive word that the National Enquirer is preparing to publish a story that will expose Scott Peterson's relationship with Amber Frey to the entire country. What investigators have known privately since December 30th is about to become public knowledge. The story has been building behind closed doors for 2 weeks. After January 13th, there are no more closed doors. The publication of that story does something that no amount of police questioning has been able to do. It reaches into the relationship between Scott and Laci's family, and it breaks it apart completely. The family that stood beside him in the early weeks, that appeared in public with him, that allowed him to be part of the search effort. That version of events is over. The bond that existed between Scott Peterson and the people who loved Laci Peterson does not survive what is coming. On January 24th, 2003, exactly 1 month after Laci was reported missing, Amber Frey stands before national television cameras and makes a statement. She is composed. She is clear. She tells the country that she met Scott Peterson on November 20th, 2002, and that she was introduced to him as a man who was not married. She says Scott confirmed he was not married. She says she had no knowledge of Laci Peterson. She had no knowledge of the pregnancy. She says she is deeply sorry for the pain this has caused Laci's family. The press conference is carried live. The country watches. The same day Amber steps in front of those cameras, Laci's brother Brent Rocha releases a public statement of his own. In it, he reveals something that has not yet been made public. He discloses that on January 16th, 8 days before Amber's press conference, Scott called him directly to tell him about the affair. Scott did not call Brent to confess, or to ask for forgiveness, or to come clean in any meaningful sense. He called to get ahead of the story before the press published it. He was managing the information, not sharing it. Brent states in his public statement that Scott has not been forthcoming with information about Laci's disappearance, and that this leaves him with no choice but to wonder what else Scott may be hiding. The statement is measured, and it is final. The family's public support for Scott Peterson ends with it. Laci's mother, Sharon Rocha, later describes what Amber's press conference does to her. She says that until that moment, she had held on to hope. She had not had anything concrete enough to fully anchor her worst fears to. Amber Frey's press conference gives her that anchor. It confirms for Sharon Rocha what she had been trying not to believe since Christmas Eve. She says afterward that the moment Amber spoke publicly, She understood that Laci was not coming home. 4 days later, on January 28th, Scott Peterson sits down with Diane Sawyer on Good Morning America. The interview is broadcast nationally. Investigators watch it carefully, and so does the rest of the country. Scott tells Diane Sawyer that he informed Amber he was married shortly after Laci disappeared. He says he called Amber and told her the truth. Amber Frey has already told investigators something completely different. She told them she found out Scott was married not from a phone call from Scott, but from a news article. Not from him, from the press. Scott's claim in the Diane Sawyer interview directly contradicts what Amber told investigators, and what Amber told investigators is supported by the recorded calls that capture exactly how and when she learned the truth. During the interview, Scott also cries. The tears come and he sits with them running down his face. He does not reach up to wipe them away. He does not press his hand to his face or turn from the camera. He lets the tears run, and he lets the camera stay on them. Investigators watching note the same specific detail that Brocchini observed at the New Year's Eve vigil. The performance is there. The instinct is not. He also tells Diane Sawyer during the interview that Laci not only knew about his relationship with Amber Frey, but had come to accept it. Diane Sawyer pushes back on this directly. She asks him whether he genuinely expects people to believe that a woman who was 8.5 months pregnant learns her husband is having an affair and makes peace with it. Scott holds his position. He does not retreat from the claim. In February, Scott's mother, Jackie Peterson, along with other family members, holds a press conference in San Diego to publicly express their continued support for Scott. They stand in front of cameras and speak on his behalf. Scott Peterson does not attend his own family's press conference. He is not there while his mother speaks publicly in his defense. On February 18th, investigators arrive at the Peterson home to execute a second search warrant. Scott comes to the door while on the phone. He is in the middle of a call in which he is attempting to cancel adult content channel subscriptions. He moves between that phone call and the interaction with the officers at his door without any visible difficulty. He switches between the two things as though neither one demands his full attention. Investigators note it and file it the same way they have filed everything else. The weeks continue. The investigation runs. The bay is searched. And then, on April 13th, 2003, 109 days after Laci Peterson was reported missing, everything changes. 2 people are walking their dog at Point Isabel Regional Shoreline Park in Richmond on the northern shore of San Francisco Bay. On a tidal flat near the water's edge, they find the body of a male fetus. They call it in immediately. The following day, a jogger moving along the rocks of the shoreline approximately 1 mile to the south, near the Richmond Bridge, finds the remains of a woman's torso. She is wearing a nursing bra and maternity pants. Investigators contact the Modesto Police Department. No one on either end of that call entertains serious doubt about what they are looking at. The location is consistent. The clothing is consistent. The timeline is consistent with a body that has been in the water since late December. The autopsies are performed by a forensic pathologist named Dr. Peterson, no relation to Scott. The findings are difficult, and in some respects inconclusive. The woman's remains are severely decomposed. Her head, arms, and most of her legs are missing. Dr. Peterson finds no evidence of man-made incisions or cuts on the body. The missing limbs are attributed to the effects of the marine environment and months of saltwater submersion. His conclusion is that the woman was still pregnant at the time of her death. The cause of death cannot be determined. The condition of the remains does not allow for it. On the body of the male fetus, investigators find a detail that will become contested during the trial. A piece of twine is tied in a small bow around the neck, with approximately 2 centimeters of space between the twine and the skin. At trial, prosecutors will argue the twine slipped to that position during the months the body was submerged in water. The defense will argue it raises the possibility that someone other than Scott handled the body after death. The twine is documented, photographed, and placed into evidence. Near the site where the bodies are discovered, investigators also find a Target Products bag, the same brand of bag used for cement products. The bag has duct tape attached to it and carries a distinct odor that leads officers to conclude Laci's body may have been transported inside it. During the autopsy of the woman's remains, a 15.5-inch piece of duct tape is found stuck to the maternity pants. It is documented and collected. It is not tested for DNA during the original investigation or at the time of trial. That decision will become significant more than 20 years later, but in April 2003, it goes into the evidence log and stays there. The geography of the discovery is the detail that prosecutors will return to again and again. Both bodies wash ashore within a few miles of the area on San Francisco Bay where Scott Peterson told police he was fishing alone on Christmas Eve, 2002. The bay where the search teams have been diving for months. The bay where Scott sat in his car during at least 5 separate visits and watched from a distance. The distance between where he says he was on December 24th and where Laci and Connor wash ashore in April is not large. It is close enough that the proximity cannot be explained away. On April 16th, Brocchini uses the wiretaps on Scott's cell phone to locate him. Scott is in San Diego, near a property connected to the family of his half-sister Ann Bird. But when Department of Justice agents go to locate Scott's truck, they find it, and someone else is behind the wheel. Scott is not in it. Investigators now have a serious concern. They believe Scott Peterson may be preparing to cross the border into Mexico. When they do locate Scott, what they find tells its own story. He has dyed his hair blonde. He has grown a thick goatee. His appearance has been deliberately altered in a way that makes him significantly harder to recognize as the man whose face has been on the national news for 4 months. Investigators who have been monitoring Scott throughout the investigation later note that he conducted counter-surveillance during those months with a level of awareness and discipline that surpassed most experienced criminals they had encountered professionally. On April 18th, the arrest warrant is issued, and law enforcement moves in. What follows is not a clean, orderly apprehension. Scott leads them on a disorienting chase through San Diego, changing directions, doubling back, maneuvering in ways that cause near accidents, and managed to lose a helicopter at one point. He eventually pulls into the parking lot of Torrey Pines Golf Course. Unmarked Department of Justice agents are on him fast enough to follow him in. Modesto police arrive at the scene at 11:15 in the morning. 115 days after Laci Peterson disappeared, Scott Lee Peterson is placed under arrest. He does not speak. He does not resist. He does not say he did not do it, or demand to know why they are doing this, or ask for an explanation of any kind. He stands with his sunglasses on, while officers take his photograph, and he says nothing. The search of his car produces the following: somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000 in cash, multiple credit cards, multiple cell phones, Viagra, camping gear, a shovel, dress shirts, dress shoes, and neckties, his brother's driver's license, and a map of Fresno, California, the city where Amber Frey lives and works. Scott's defense would later argue these items were consistent with a man trying to avoid media harassment and death threats. Investigators look at the cash, the disguise, the brother's identification, and the map to his girlfriend's city, and they reach a different conclusion. The drive from San Diego back to Stanislaus County Jail takes 10 hours. Scott sits in the back seat behind Detective Brocchini and Detective John Bueller for most of that journey without saying much. At some point during the drive, he tells the detectives he is hungry. He says he would like an In-N-Out burger. He orders a double-double with cheese, fries, and a vanilla shake. Brocchini later describes the atmosphere in that car during the drive as being almost casual, like coming back from a fishing trip, he says. Before they arrive at the jail, a call comes through. The DNA results are confirmed. The woman found on the shoreline at Point Isabel is Laci Peterson. The male fetus found on the tidal flat is Connor Peterson. California law requires that the next of kin be formally notified when a victim's identity is confirmed through DNA analysis. The next of kin for Laci Peterson is her husband. That notification is delivered to Scott Peterson while he is handcuffed in the back of a police vehicle, charged with her murder somewhere on the road between San Diego and Modesto. He is told that the DNA results confirm it is Laci. He is told that it is Connor. He is the next of kin, and the law requires that he be told first. He receives the notification, and the car continues north. The case against Scott Peterson is one of the most heavily covered criminal prosecutions in American history. By the time it reaches a courtroom, it has been dissected in newspapers, on cable television, and across every major news outlet in the country for more than a year. Finding 12 people who have not already formed a firm opinion about Scott Peterson's guilt or innocence is not a simple task in Stanislaus County, where the case began and where the name Laci Peterson has been part of the daily conversation since Christmas Eve 2002. The trial is moved to San Mateo County, in the city of Redwood City, for precisely that reason. Judge Alfred DeLucci is assigned to preside. One of his first significant decisions is to bar cameras from the courtroom for the entire duration of the trial. In a case that has fed on media attention since the night Laci was reported missing, it is a deliberate choice to keep what happens inside that room separate from what happens outside it. Jury selection begins on March 4th, 2004. It takes nearly 3 months. A jury of 6 men and 6 women is finally seated by May 27th. The trial itself opens on June 1st, 2004, 18 months after the Christmas Eve morning when Scott Peterson drove away from the house on Covina Avenue and Laci was never seen again. The prosecution is handled by Deputy District Attorneys Rick DiStasso and Dave Harris from the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office. Over the course of the trial, the prosecution calls 174 witnesses. The defense calls 14. That disparity alone tells part of the story of how the two sides approach their task. Rick DiStasso does something in his opening statement that takes some observers by surprise. He does not pretend the case is built on direct evidence. He acknowledges from the outset that this is a circumstantial case. There is no murder weapon. There is no confirmed crime scene. There is no cause of death. DiStasso addresses all of this directly and without apology. He tells the jury that circumstantial evidence, properly understood, can be more reliable than eyewitness testimony. That a pattern of documented facts taken together can tell a story more clearly than any single witness account. Then he begins laying out the pattern. The prosecution presents every layer of the case in sequence. The secret boat, purchased on December 9th. The tide research conducted before Laci disappeared. The 2-day fishing. License obtained by a man who had not fished in 8 years. The inability to name the bait or the target fish. The trained police K-9 that picked up Laci's scent at the Berkeley Marina boat ramp just 4 days after she vanished. The hair and the needle-nosed pliers consistent with Laci's mitochondrial DNA profile. The single recovered concrete anchor with 4 others unaccounted for. The pattern of documented lies told to investigators, to family members, and to the national press. The condition and location of the bodies when they were found. And Scott's behavior from the moment officers arrived on Christmas Eve through to the moment he was arrested with dyed hair, a goatee, his brother's identification, and cash in a car pointed toward the Mexican border. DiStasso presents each of these items not as a collection of isolated coincidences, but as a connected, cumulative pattern of premeditated behavior. He asks the jury to look at all of it together and decide what it adds up to. On the question of motive, DiStasso is specific. He tells the jury that Scott Peterson did not kill Laci in order to be with Amber Frey. He says that directly. He acknowledges that the affair is not itself the motive. What the affair represents, he argues, is evidence of a man who had already emotionally abandoned his marriage long before Christmas Eve. Scott had constructed a version of his life that was built around freedom, international travel, romance, independence, a future unburdened by the responsibilities of a family he had not chosen to want. Laci's pregnancy was the permanent closure of that version of himself. It was the door shutting on everything he had been quietly building toward. Freedom, DiStasso tells the jury, is what he wanted. And the prosecution argues he decided to take it. The early phase of the trial moves slowly, and the prosecution's case, in its opening weeks, does not land with the clarity DiStasso's opening suggested it would. Legal analysts covering the trial note that the prosecution appears at times disjointed and difficult to follow. A juror dismissed in June had already told reporters he would have voted to acquit based on what he had seen so far. The prosecution needs something to shift the momentum. That something arrives in the form of Detective Craig Grogan. Grogan is the lead investigator on the case, and when he takes the stand, he walks the jury through the full investigative timeline with a precision and coherence that the earlier testimony had not consistently achieved. His testimony is detailed, controlled, and methodical. Legal analysts covering the trial note that the prosecution visibly regains its footing once Grogan is on the stand. The picture he constructs for the jury is the picture that DiStasso outlined in his opening. but Grogan builds it brick by brick with the authority of someone who was present for every stage of the investigation from Christmas Eve onward. On August 10th, 2004, Amber Frey takes the stand. She describes the relationship from the beginning. She describes meeting Scott on November 20th through a mutual friend who told her he was not married. She describes Scott confirming it. She describes the conversations that followed and the way the relationship developed over the following weeks. And then she describes December 9th, the day Scott called her in tears and told her he had lost his wife 15 days before Laci was reported missing. After Amber finishes describing the relationship and its timeline, the jury hears something that no amount of witness testimony can fully replicate. They hear Scott Peterson's voice. The recorded calls are played directly into the courtroom. The New Year's Eve call where Scott, standing at a candlelight vigil for his missing wife in Modesto, tells Amber he is watching fireworks near the Eiffel Tower in Paris. The call where he tells her he has taken a police polygraph and passed. The call where he tells her that Laci not only knew about the relationship but had accepted it. Each call plays in sequence, and Scott's voice fills the room. Then prosecutors show the jury a photograph. It was taken on December 14th, 2002, 10 days before Laci Peterson disappeared. It shows Scott and Amber together at a Christmas party. They are smiling. His arm is around her. The photograph is placed before the jury without commentary from the prosecution. It does not require any. When Rick DeStasso delivers his closing argument, he stands before the jury and holds up an aerial photograph of San Francisco Bay. He points to the rocky shoreline near Point Isabel in Richmond, where the bodies of Laci and Connor washed ashore in April. Then he points to the area a few miles away on that same bay, where Scott told police he was fishing alone on Christmas Eve, 2002. He tells the jury that the only person they know with absolute certainty was present in the exact location where Laci and Connor were found is the man sitting at the defense table. He says they can take that fact to the bank. He tells them to convict. On the other side of that courtroom sits Mark Garagos. Garagos is one of the most prominent criminal defense attorneys in the country at the time he takes the case. He has represented Michael Jackson. He has represented Chris Brown. He is experienced, aggressive, and confident, and he brings all of that into the courtroom from the first day. In his opening statement, he dismisses the physical evidence against Scott Peterson with a phrase that becomes one of the most quoted lines of the entire trial. He calls it zero, zip, nada, nothing. He tells the jury the prosecution has built a case on suspicion and character, not on proof. Garagos argues that Detective Brocchini had tunnel vision from the first night of the investigation and pursued Scott Peterson as the only viable suspect while failing to properly investigate leads that pointed elsewhere. He highlights a burglary that took place across the street from the Peterson home around the time of Laci's disappearance and argues that investigators dismissed it without giving it the scrutiny it deserved. He presents witnesses who claim they saw Laci walking the dog in the neighborhood after Scott had already left for the Berkeley Marina, arguing that if those sightings are credible, Laci was alive after Scott's departure, and someone else was responsible for what happened to her. But the most consequential thing Mark Garagos does in this trial is not something he presents. It is something he promises and does not deliver. In his opening statement, Garagos tells the jury that the defense will prove Connor Peterson was born alive after Laci disappeared. This is not a minor claim. If true, it would mean Laci was still alive and still pregnant after December 24th, 2002, which would destroy the prosecution's entire timeline and theory of the crime. It would mean someone other than Scott killed her after that date. Garagos makes this promise to the jury in his opening statement with the confidence of a man who intends to keep it. He does not keep it. The defense never produces the evidence to support the claim. Every legal observer covering the trial notices the failure to deliver on a promise made to a jury in an opening statement is one of the most damaging things a defense attorney can do, and Garagos does it in one of the most watched trials in the country. On June 23, 2004, juror number 5, a man named Justin Falconer, is dismissed from the panel. He has been observed in conversation with Laci's brother Brent Rocha at a security checkpoint inside the courthouse. Judge DeLucchi removes him. The trial continues. On November 3rd, jury deliberations begin. What follows inside the jury room over the next several days is not a straightforward process of review and decision. It is a period of internal disruption that requires the jury to be reconstituted twice before a verdict is reached. A female juror is removed from the panel after it is established that she conducted personal research into the case outside the courtroom, a violation of the judge's instructions. Deliberations stop. The jury is reconstituted with an alternate and ordered to begin again from the start. Then the foreman is removed. His fellow jurors have effectively deposed him, concluding that they cannot continue with him in the role. He is excused at his own request. Another alternate is brought in. Deliberations restart from scratch for the second time, now with a third composition of the panel. This third jury deliberates for 7 hours. At the end of those 7 hours, they have a verdict. November 12, 2004. Nearly 2 years after Christmas Eve, 2002. Scott Peterson is found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Laci Peterson. He is found guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Connor Peterson. The first-degree conviction, combined with the special circumstance of multiple murder counts, makes him eligible for the death penalty. The verdict is read aloud in the courtroom. Scott sits stone-faced. His chin is raised slightly. He does not look down. Several of the jurors meet his gaze as the clerk reads the findings, and they do not look away. On the other side of the courtroom, Sharon Rocha collapses. She falls into the arms of her son Brent, and she weeps. Jackie Peterson, Scott's mother, who has sat in that courtroom throughout the trial, bows her head as the words are read. Mark Garagos is not present. He has remained in Los Angeles and does not come to court for the reading of the verdict in the case he has been leading. On December 13, 2004, the jury returns for the penalty phase and delivers its recommendation unanimously. Death. On March 16, 2005, Judge Alfred DeLucchi follows the jury's recommendation and formally sentences Scott Lee Peterson to death by lethal injection. Scott Peterson is transported from the courthouse to San Quentin State Prison, where California's death row is housed, and where he will remain for the next 15 years. Scott Peterson was found guilty and sentenced to death. But the case does not end there. Not by a long way. What happened over the next 20 years is something most people who followed this trial never saw coming. Subscribe to Revealing Untold Crimes if you have not already. And stay right here, because the final chapter of this story is not over yet. Scott Peterson arrived at San Quentin State Prison in the spring of 2005 carrying a death sentence and what appeared to be a closed case. The jury had spoken. The judge had followed their recommendation. The evidence had been presented, weighed, and decided upon by 12 people who deliberated under oath. For most people watching from the outside, the Peterson case was over. It was not over. In August of 2020, 15 years after Scott Peterson was sentenced to death, the California Supreme Court issued a ruling that changed his legal status in a significant way. The court found that Judge Alfred DeLucchi had made a procedural error during jury selection in 2004. Specifically, the court determined that DeLucchi had improperly excluded prospective jurors from the panel based solely on their stated opposition to the death penalty. Under California law, opposition to capital punishment alone is not sufficient grounds to remove a juror from a capital case. The court's ruling addresses this procedural error. It does not address the question of whether Scott Peterson killed Laci and Connor. It does not suggest the evidence was insufficient or that the verdict was wrong. It addresses how the jury was selected, and on that narrow procedural ground, it overturns the death sentence. In 2021, Scott Peterson is brought back before the court for resentencing. The Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office, which prosecuted the original case, declines to seek a new death sentence. The decision not to pursue the death penalty again means the resentencing proceeds to the only remaining option under California law for a double murder conviction of this kind. Scott Peterson is resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is transferred from San Quentin, where California's death row is housed, to Mule Creek State Prison in the city of Ione, California. That is where he is held today. In 2022, Scott's legal team files an appeal based on alleged juror misconduct. The appeal centers on a juror named Rochelle Nice. The defense argues that Rochelle Nice provided false answers on her juror questionnaire during the selection process in 2004. specifically that she failed to disclose information that, had it been known, would have disqualified her from serving on the panel. A judge considers the appeal and denies it. Scott Peterson is not granted a new trial on this basis. The ruling is challenged, and that challenge is filed with the California Supreme Court, where it remains pending. In January of 2024, the Los Angeles Innocence Project announces that it is representing Scott Peterson. The Los Angeles Innocence Project is a non-profit organization that investigates claims of actual innocence in cases where convictions are already final. Their involvement in a case of this profile draws immediate national attention. They begin filing motions and identifying items of evidence they argue were never properly tested or fully investigated at the time of the original trial. The organization focuses on 4 specific areas. The first is the 15.5-inch piece of duct tape found on Laci's maternity pants during the original autopsy. This item was collected at the time of the autopsy, documented in the evidence log, and never tested for DNA during the investigation or at trial. The second is a blood-stained mattress found inside a burned orange van that was discovered less than 1 mile from the Peterson home on Covina Avenue the day after Laci was reported missing. Investigators examined this lead at the time and concluded it was unrelated to Laci's disappearance. The Los Angeles Innocence Project argues the lead was not pursued with the rigor it deserved and that the mattress should be tested. The third area involves the forensic methodology used at trial by prosecution expert Dr. Gregory DeVore to establish Connor Peterson's gestational age and estimated date of death. Dr. DeVore's analysis at trial relied on ultrasound research and methodology from 1984. The Los Angeles Innocence Project presents new expert testimony arguing that updated ultrasound technology and current scientific methodology place Connor's likely time of death days after Christmas Eve 2002. If that finding is accurate, it would mean Laci was still alive and still pregnant after December 24th, which would fundamentally undercut the prosecution's timeline and theory of the crime. The fourth area is a burglary that took place across the street from the Peterson home around the time of Laci's disappearance. The Los Angeles Innocence Project argues that this burglary was never fully investigated as a potential abduction scenario and that the people connected to it were not adequately pursued as alternative suspects. In May of 2024, Judge Elizabeth Hill, who is presiding over the post-conviction proceedings in San Mateo County, rules on the Los Angeles Innocence Project's motion for new DNA testing. She grants testing on one item and one item only, the duct tape found on Laci's maternity pants. All other requests for new testing are denied. Prosecutors respond to the ruling by describing the push for additional DNA testing as unnecessary. They note that evidence in the case had already been tested once in 2013 and again in 2019, and that those tests did not produce results that undermine the conviction. In October of 2024, Judge Hill issues a further ruling granting Scott's request for post-conviction discovery. This gives the defense access to evidence that the Los Angeles Innocence Project claims was withheld from the defense at the time of the original trial. The materials granted include police interviews conducted with burglary suspects and the complete California Department of Justice Central Valley Crime Laboratory file related to the burned orange van. In March of 2025, a separate hearing grants the defense access to additional decades-old evidence connected to the investigation. In August of 2000 and 2004, Scott Peterson gives his first on-camera interview in more than 20 years. He appears in a 3-part documentary series produced for Peacock titled Face to Face with Scott Peterson. In the series, he maintains his innocence. He acknowledges the affair with Amber Frey and describes himself as a total failure as a husband. He denies any involvement in Laci's death. He disputes the way that recorded phone calls were characterized and presented during his trial. It is the first time since a television interview in early 2003 that Scott Peterson has spoken publicly about the case on camera. In August of 2000 and 2005, the Los Angeles Innocence Project files a 140-page habeas corpus petition with the California courts. The petition argues that exculpatory evidence was destroyed or suppressed before and during the original trial, and that the forensic science used to establish Connor's date of death was materially unreliable under current scientific standards. The petition is the most comprehensive legal challenge to the conviction since it was handed down in 2004. On June 2, 2025, a California appeals court denies the petition. The court finds that the claims are either procedurally barred under California law or lack sufficient merit to warrant relief. Paula Mitchell, the director of the Los Angeles Innocence Project, responds publicly. She states that the organization disagrees with the ruling on every level and that strong exculpatory evidence was improperly disregarded by the court. She announces that the organization will appeal the decision to a higher court. That appeal is filed. It is pending. Through all of it, Sharon Rocha has submitted statements to the court, opposing every new motion and every new appeal filed on Scott Peterson's behalf. At a hearing in July of 2024, she addresses the court directly. Her words are part of the official record. She says that Laci was murdered by the man she loved with all her heart. She says that Laci and Connor are gone forever and that their lives were taken because he murdered them. She says that Laci's family and friends have also been living inside a kind of prison imposed on them by his actions, and that they will never be released from it regardless of what any court decides going forward. The original investigators and prosecutors who built and tried the case in 2004 have stood behind the conviction consistently and without qualification throughout all of the legal challenges that have followed. The case produced something beyond the verdict. In 2004, the same year Scott Peterson was convicted, the United States federal government passed a piece of legislation that would not have existed without what happened to Laci and Connor Peterson. The Unborn Victims of Violence Act, signed into law that year, allows for separate federal criminal charges to be brought when an unborn child is killed during a violent crime committed against a pregnant woman. The law is known by another name in common use. It is called Laci and Connor's Law. Sharon Rocha, who lost her daughter and her unborn grandson on Christmas Eve 2002, became a public advocate for victims of violence in the years that followed the trial. Her voice, which has appeared in courtrooms opposing appeal after appeal, is part of the reason that name is on that law. As of the date of this video, Scott Peterson is incarcerated at Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California. He is serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. His legal team, led by the Los Angeles Innocence Project, continues to pursue every available avenue of appeal. The original investigators and the original prosecution team remain firm in their position that the right man was convicted in 2004. The duct tape from Laci's maternity pants has been sent for DNA testing. Those results have not yet determined the outcome of the legal proceedings underway. The only person who can say with certainty what happened inside the house on Covina Avenue on the morning of December 24, 2002, is Scott Peterson. He has now given interviews. He has maintained his innocence. He has acknowledged failures and disputed characterizations, and spoken at length about the case from inside a prison cell. But in more than 20 years of public statements and legal filings and on-camera interviews, he has never provided an account of that morning that satisfies the question at the center of everything. What happened to Laci Peterson? Thank you for watching this all the way through. If this case made you think, share it with one person who follows true crime, because cases like this one deserve more than a headline. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think about the evidence, the ongoing appeals, and where you believe this case goes from here. We read every comment, and if you have not subscribed to Revealing Untold Crimes yet, now is the time. Hit subscribe and the bell so you never miss a new case. We will see you on the next one.